Before we begin, I want to tell you something simple. One rainy October afternoon, a little boy heard a sound no one else could, a silent cry beneath the sycamore tree. He found a wounded golden retriever dragging himself through the mud and named him Sonny. That moment, it changed everything. This is not just a story about rescue. It's about connection, healing, and the voices only children seem to hear. If that touches something in you, please like this video, subscribe to Tales of Warmth, and stay until the end. Because Sonny's journey and Lucas's gift is something you'll never forget. The rain hadn't let up since morning. It fell in long, whispering sheets that curled around the quiet corners of Willow Creek, a sleepy town nestled in the folds of Vermont's golden woods. The air was rich with the scent of wet earth and wood smoke. Autumn leaves drifted in circles along the narrow streets, clinging to the worn cobblestones like forgotten promises. Mist hung low over the rooftops, blurring the edges of fences, chimneys, and the familiar. Everything felt distant, like the world was holding its breath. In a modest, cream-colored house at the edge of town, 6-year-old Lucas Miller sat on the wide windowsill of the living room, his knees pulled to his chest, his small fingers tracing condensation on the glass. He was a boy made of softness and silence, his eyes large and green like river moss, his face framed by unruly brown curls that defied even his mother's most determined comb. Lucas didn't speak much, but when he did, it was as if each word had wandered a long road before reaching his lips. He was not a child who filled rooms with sound, but one who noticed the rustle of ants under leaves and the way the wind curled around corners. Behind him in the kitchen, Hannah Miller stirred a pot of butternut squash soup on the stove. The soft clink of her wooden spoon against the pot echoed through the house. Hannah was a woman in her early 30s, tall and lean, with a grace that came from a life of holding things together. Her hair was the color of dried wheat and almost always pulled back in a messy knot. She wore tiredness in her shoulders and gentleness in her voice. A third-grade teacher, a single mother, and a quiet survivor of disappointment, Hannah had learned how to carry both her hopes and her heartache without making noise about either. Lucas pressed his nose to the cold glass. Outside the backyard was a blurred canvas of swaying trees, rain-soaked grass, and the dark outline of the old sycamore grove that marked the border of their property. The grove had always been a little wild, a little mysterious. Hannah had warned Lucas to never go near it without her. "Mom," he said, voice soft as breath. "Can I go outside?" Hannah glanced over her shoulder, lips tugging into a frown. "Not today, sweetheart. It's pouring and dinner's almost ready. Come keep me company." But Lucas didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the trees. The rain had a rhythm, but something interrupted it, a faint sound barely there. His head tilted like he was listening for a melody only he could hear. "Mom," he said again, barely above a whisper. "Something's crying." Hannah turned off the burner and walked over, drying her hands on a tea towel. "It's just the wind, honey. It gets caught in the branches sometimes. Makes strange sounds." Lucas shook his head slowly. "No, it's not the wind." And before she could stop him, he was sliding down from the windowsill, padding across the hardwood floor in his socks and pulling open the back door. A rush of cold, damp air swept into the house. Lucas. James Miller. "You come back in here right now," Hannah called, but her voice snagged in her throat when she saw the stillness in her son's eyes. He stood on the porch framed by the storm, his tiny frame unmoving as the wind tugged at the hem of his sweatshirt. "Shh," he said, holding a finger to his lips. "Can you hear it?" And she did. A whimper, broken and thin, not human, not wind. Something aching and raw carried through the rain like a secret. Hannah grabbed her coat and rain boots, but by the time she stepped onto the porch, Lucas was already running his feet, splashing through puddles, hair plastered to his forehead, drawn by something no adult logic could hold back. "Lucas," she shouted, her voice shaking now. "Wait!" He didn't stop. The grass was slick, and the yard sloped downward toward the trees. Hannah struggled to keep up, slipping more than once as she chased after him. Lucas didn't falter. His small body moved with the urgent purpose of someone following a compass deeper than fear. He stopped at the roots of a massive sycamore tree, its silver-gray bark peeling like old paper, its limbs reaching out like arms, trying to remember what it felt like to hold. And there, curled into the dirt and leaves, was a shape. A dog. golden-coated though dulled by mud and rain, large though far too thin. His hind legs twisted unnaturally motionless. His sides rose and fell in shallow, broken breaths. One ear hung torn. His eyes, though his eyes were burning amber, filled with exhaustion and warning. The dog growled a low, wavering sound that said, "Don't come closer, but also don't leave me here." Hannah froze. "Lucas, stay back. He's hurt. He might bite." But Lucas had already dropped to his knees. The mud soaked through his pants, but he didn't seem to notice. His voice was softer than the rain. "I won't hurt you," he said. "I promise." "Lucas, please. He's not going to bite me," Lucas interrupted. "He's scared. He's trying to tell me something." The boy reached out a hand, trembling but steady. The dog didn't move. His growl faded. And then, so slowly, Hannah barely registered it, the dog let out a sigh like something deep inside him had finally exhaled after holding its breath for days. Lucas laid his hand gently on the dog's head. "He says his name is Sonny." Hannah stared, stunned. "What?" "I heard it," Lucas whispered. "Not like talking. Just inside. Like a warm thought." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She was wet, cold, and scared, but the sight in front of her was not dangerous. It was heartbreakingly tender. Her son, fragile and soaked to the bone, was sitting beside something broken, and both of them looked less alone now. "He's really hurt," Lucas added. "We have to help him." "I'll call animal control," Hannah said, already reaching for her phone. "No," Lucas said sharply. "They'll take him away. They'll say he's too hurt and put him to sleep. I've seen it." "Lucas, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Just trust me. He says he's safe with us." And in that moment, looking at the strange stillness between boy and beast, Hannah's certainty dissolved. She nodded slowly. "All right, I'll call Dr. Hayes." Lucas smiled, and the dog. Sonny closed his eyes as if resting for the first time in a long, long while. They stayed that way for a minute longer. Hannah on her feet, Lucas in the mud. Sonny curled like a fallen leaf beneath the tree that had been standing there longer than memory. Rain whispered through the branches, but in that small clearing something had changed. Something had found its way home. The wind had calmed by morning, but the sky still hung heavy with unfinished rain. The light that filtered through the clouds was pale and unsure, like the world itself was reluctant to wake. Inside the Wilson house, Lucas sat cross-legged on a folded blanket near the fireplace, gently stroking Sonny's fur with small, careful hands. The dog hadn't moved much since the night before. His breathing was labored, but no longer ragged, and he didn't flinch at Lucas's touch. If anything, he leaned into it just barely, as if anchoring himself to the warmth. Hannah paced behind them, her fingers wrapped tightly around the phone as she spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "Miranda, I know it's your day off, but it's an emergency. Yes, it's a stray, but I think he was abused. Yes, my son found him. No, he's not aggressive. Please, just come. I'll owe you." She hung up, exhaled hard, and turned toward the stairs. "Lucas, I called Grandpa. He's coming to help us carry Sonny. Doctor Hayes will meet us at the clinic in 30 minutes. Can you pack some towels for the car?" Lucas nodded and got to his feet without a word. He moved like someone older than 6, quiet, efficient, not panicked. Something in him had settled the moment Sonny appeared. As he walked down the hall, Hannah watched her son with unease curling in her chest. There was something happening between the boy and the dog, something deeper than instinct or kindness. 10 minutes later, the sound of tires crunching wet gravel reached their ears, and Lucas ran to the front door, swinging it open before the knock came. Clyde Spencer stood on the porch, stooping slightly under the weight of his years and the drizzle falling from the eaves. He was a man in his late 60s, with silver hair that curled over his ears and a neatly trimmed beard that framed his weathered face. Dressed in a forest green flannel shirt, old jeans and boots he'd worn since Hannah was a child, Clyde was the kind of man who didn't speak unless there was something worth saying. His eyes, sharp beneath his brow, softened the moment they landed on his grandson. "Morning, buddy," he said, voice a gravelly rumble. "Heard you made a friend." Lucas stepped aside and Clyde entered slowly, his eyes falling on Sonny's motionless form. His face tightened. "Jesus," he murmured. "What the hell happened to you, boy?" "We don't know," Hannah said, grabbing a towel from the rack. But Lucas says someone did it on purpose, that he heard it from the dog. Clyde raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He knelt beside Sonny, inspecting the dog's legs and ribs with a practiced gentleness. "Seen worse," he muttered. "But not much." Together they lifted Sonny using a comforter as a sling. The dog whimpered softly but didn't struggle. Lucas sat in the back seat with him, one hand resting on the dog's head throughout the bumpy drive down to Main Street. The veterinary clinic sat between the bakery and the antique shop, its white siding and green trim modest and welcoming. The hand-painted sign above the door read Hayes Animal Care. They pulled into the gravel lot just as a silver Prius came to a stop at the curb. Dr. Miranda Hayes stepped out, tugging her hood up against the drizzle. In her mid-40s, Miranda was tall and willowy, with long auburn hair streaked with silver and tied into a loose braid. Her eyes were sharp gray and always seemed to be taking in more than they let on. There was something distant in her movements, a detachment that had grown more defined since her divorce 2 years ago, though she remained gentle with every creature that passed through her doors. Animals she trusted, people not so much. She unlocked the clinic quickly, holding the door open as Clyde and Hannah carried Sonny inside and placed him on a padded table. Lucas hovered close behind. "Golden Retriever, male, unneutered, maybe 6 or 7 years old," Miranda said immediately, running her hands over Sonny's limbs. "No collar, badly underweight, severe swelling and obvious displacement in the hind legs, likely fractures. Multiple abrasions. Someone either hit him with a car or did this with intent." Lucas stood at the foot of the table, his small hands clenched into fists. "It was a man," he said suddenly. "His name is Jake. Sonny didn't fight, so he got mad and hurt him." Everyone turned toward the boy. Hannah said gently, "How do you know that I saw it?" he said. "In my head. Sonny showed me. He used to be with other dogs in cages, but he didn't want to fight, he just wanted to play. So the man kicked him." Clyde looked at his daughter. Hannah stared at Dr. Hayes. Miranda didn't scoff. She didn't dismiss it as imagination. Instead, she asked Jake, who Lucas shook his head. "I don't know. But he has dark glasses even indoors. And he smells like metal and old socks." Miranda blinked. "Can you help him?" Lucas asked, moving closer to Sonny. Miranda sighed. "It won't be easy. He'll need x-ray surgery and weeks of recovery. It's expensive." "We'll figure it out," Hannah said quickly. "We're not letting him go." Miranda nodded, already moving to prepare an injection. "This is just to help him sleep while I take the scans. We'll start there." As she worked, Clyde pulled Hannah aside. "You think he made that up?" "I don't know," she said softly. "But he said the dog's name was Sonny before I ever called you. And now this?" "I've seen kids like him before," Clyde murmured, "back when I worked Forest Patrol. There was this boy who used to know when bears were nearby before we ever found the tracks. Some people just have a thread tied between them and animals. I don't want him hurt." Hannah said, her voice catching. "I know." Meanwhile, Lucas remained by Sonny's side until the anesthesia took hold. He leaned down and whispered something into the dog's ear. No one could hear the words, but the dog's tail gave a single feeble thump before going still. They waited in the small lobby while Miranda did the scans. The walls were lined with photos of adopted pets and shelves stacked with worn books about animal care. Lucas sat quietly on the floor, drawing a picture of Sonny in a borrowed sketch pad. After 30 minutes, Miranda emerged, her gloves in one hand, an image in the other. Both hind legs broken. Clean fractures. No signs of road rash. Which means this wasn't a car. "Somebody did this." Lucas looked up. "I told you. Jake." Miranda nodded slowly. Sonny would need to stay overnight, and Hannah signed the necessary forms, promising to return with supplies in the morning. As they walked to the car, Lucas glanced back at the clinic door. "He says thank you," he whispered. Hannah paused. "Who does Sonny?" Lucas said, smiling faintly. "He knows we're not going to leave him." Night came gently to Willow Creek, settling like a hush over the rooftops and pine-draped hills. The rain had thinned into a fine mist that lingered in the air, weaving silver threads through the amber streetlights. The town was quiet, save for the occasional bark in the distance or the rattle of wind against old shutters. Inside his bedroom, Lucas lay curled beneath his blankets, his brow furrowed in sleep. His breathing was restless, and his small hands gripped the edge of his pillow like he was bracing himself against something unseen. In his dream, there was no sky, only a low ceiling made of rusted steel and flickering fluorescent lights. The air smelled of bleach and fear. Metal cages lined both sides of the narrow hall, each one filled with dogs, some barking, some trembling, others lying perfectly still, muzzles, stained eyes, hollow. Lucas walked barefoot across the cold floor, drawn by a soft whimper from the last cage on the left. Inside, Sonny sat with his head down, a scar blooming across one leg. The moment their eyes met, a deep guttural growl rose from behind Lucas. He turned, and there stood a shadowed figure with dark glasses, face obscured, holding a leash like a weapon. Lucas woke with a jolt, sweat slicking his forehead despite the chill. He sat up quickly, heart thudding, and looked toward the window where the first light of dawn was just beginning to smear across the sky. Downstairs, he heard the familiar creak of the floorboards, his mother already up, probably making tea before school. He padded down the steps quietly and found Hannah at the kitchen table, sipping from her favorite chipped mug, a soft gray cardigan wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair, usually tied up, was loose this morning, falling in tired waves. "Bad dream again?" she asked, not looking up. Lucas nodded, crawling into her lap like he hadn't done in months. She held him, rubbing small circles on his back. "Same place?" she asked softly. "Worse," he whispered. There were more cages this time, and the man with the glasses was closer. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of her son's hair grass, rain, and something unexplainable. She didn't understand the dreams, but she believed in the thread between Lucas and Sonny. Some part of her always had. Later that day, after school let out, Hannah picked Lucas up and drove straight to Hayes Animal Care. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh hay. Sonny was resting in the back room, hooked up to an IV, one leg bandaged and suspended. When Lucas entered, the dog's tail lifted weakly, thumping once against the padding. Dr. Miranda Hayes appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, her braid slung over one shoulder. She nodded a greeting. "He's stable. That tail thump is a good sign. But he's been uneasy today, pacing when he can, whining softly like he's expecting something." Lucas walked over to the table and placed his hand gently on Sonny's head. The dog let out a breath and settled again. Miranda's eyes flickered with thought. "How's he sleeping?" she asked Hannah. "Lucas. Not well. Nightmares mostly. He says they're not his dreams." Miranda hesitated. "You said yesterday he knew the name Jake." Lucas nodded from across the room. "He hurt Sonny. He made him fight." Miranda set her clipboard down, pulling up a chair. "There was an investigation last year," she said. "A farm just outside town. Used to be an old apple orchard, but the buildings were left to rot. Locals said they heard barking late at night. Some hikers claimed they saw cages. Sheriff's office did a sweep, found a few rusty chains, empty food bags, nothing concrete. No charges filed. Then it went quiet." "Do you think it's still happening?" Hannah asked. Miranda shrugged. "Could be. Could have moved. Could be nothing. But your son describing that place so clearly, the cages, the layout, it lines up with what was reported. Maybe he saw photos somewhere," Hannah offered, but her voice lacked conviction. Lucas stood up suddenly. "I didn't see pictures. I saw it in my sleep. Sonny remembers." Miranda looked at the boy, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "You ever seen the old orchard, Lucas?" He shook his head. A moment passed in silence before Miranda stood. "I'm going out there tomorrow, just to take a look. I'll bring my flashlight and a camera." "Alone?" Hannah asked. "Better that way. People don't talk when there's a badge in the car, and I've been a vet in this town long enough. People trust me." Lucas knelt beside Sonny again, whispering something only the dog could hear. As they drove home that evening, Hannah noticed Lucas staring out the window, not blinking. "What is it, honey?" Sonny said. There were others, dogs that didn't make it. The car rolled past the fading trees, their branches bare and reaching. That night, Lucas dreamed again. This time, the cages were empty. The doors swung open with the wind, and the floors were slick with something red. The sound of panting echoed down the hall, desperate and lonely. And in the corner, hidden beneath a sheet of torn canvas, something moved. The morning sun was a weak golden smear across the hills, struggling to pierce through the thick fog that clung to Willow Creek like an old secret. Mist curled along the edges of fences and telephone wires, blurring the town's familiar lines. Hannah stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window, her fingers motionless on the mug she hadn't yet sipped from. Across the yard, parked just beyond the sycamore tree where Sunny had been found, was a black SUV she didn't recognize. No markings. Windows too dark. It hadn't moved since sunrise. She turned away and found Lucas already dressed, his backpack slung awkwardly over one shoulder and a crayon drawing folded in his hand. "I don't want to go to school," he said quietly. "Lucas." "She's coming," he interrupted, as if he'd been told, not as if he hoped. "The lady who knows about the dogs. The one who stopped looking too early." That same morning at precisely 8:15, a Navy sedan rolled into the gravel lot of Hayes Animal Care. Behind the wheel sat Grace Donovan, a woman in her early 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark olive skin and close-cropped salt and pepper hair. Her face was worn with time, the faint lines around her mouth more from restraint than laughter. She wore a dark trench coat, boots polished to a dull gleam, and a silver badge pinned discreetly under her lapel. Her eyes, deep-set and calculating, missed nothing. Grace had been a detective with the County Animal Control Task Force nearly a decade ago, before bureaucracy and politics dissolved the unit into memory. Her name had once been whispered with both respect and regret, especially after the Pine Hollow investigation had turned up nothing but hearsay and abandoned collars. She'd walked away not because she gave up, but because they'd stopped letting her look. Dr. Hayes met her at the clinic door, her brow tense. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "You left a voicemail saying a child named the site I failed to find with terrifying accuracy," Grace said, stepping inside. "That'll bring anyone out of retirement." She was led into the small exam room where Sonny lay dozing in his crate legs, still braced, but healing. Lucas sat nearby, quietly drawing spirals on a paper towel. The moment Grace entered, the boy looked up. "You're Grace," he said, like reading a label. She paused. "Yes, I am. You're sad because you lost too many," Lucas added, not unkindly. "But you're here because Sonny remembers the ones you didn't save." Dr. Hayes opened her mouth, then closed it. Grace knelt to Lucas's level, not blinking. "What else does Sonny remember?" Lucas looked toward the window. "There's a red door," he whispered. "In the hills. Under the house. 12. Maybe more. They're cold. Some can't bark anymore." Grace stood slowly, her throat dry. "There's an old miner's cabin near Barrow Ridge. Door was red last I saw it, but that was years ago. No cause to search was listed vacant by the county. Until now." Back at the Wilson house, Hannah couldn't shake the image of that parked SUV. When she stepped outside to check the mailbox, it started up no engine rev, no acknowledgement, and rolled slowly down the street. Her stomach clenched. That night, she pulled the blinds down tight and kept the porch light off. Lucas wasn't imagining things. She saw it now. There was a weight to all this she hadn't wanted to believe. The following morning, Grace returned with a plan. She would head to Barrow Ridge with Dr. Hayes. Sheriff's Department was still skeptical, so it had to be unofficial for now. Lucas insisted on giving them something before they left, a drawing. On the page were crude shapes of cages beneath a house drawn in crayon with a red rectangle near the top. "They keep the keys in the box under the porch," Lucas said, as if Sonny had whispered it straight into his ear. Grace tucked the paper into her pocket. "That's enough for me." By midday, the women had reached the old miner's cabin, half swallowed by wild sage and creeping ivy. The red door was faded but visible beneath flaking paint. Grace moved ahead, flashlight in one hand, Glock in the other. Miranda followed, less steady, but just as determined. Under the house, through a warped hatch behind the cellar stairs, was a narrow corridor. Cold, damp, and silent until they turned the final corner and heard it, a soft, repeated whine. The cages were there, rusted, packed close, 12 of them. 10 dogs, still breathing, eyes wide with silent pleading. 2 were unmoving, curled in a corner. The air reeked of rot and wet fur. Grace stared for a long moment, then raised her phone. "It's real," she muttered, voice tight. "We weren't wrong." Back in Willow Creek, as Grace coordinated the recovery team and animal rescue services, things took a darker turn at the Wilson home. That night, Hannah caught sight of the same SUV again, only this time it didn't wait. It passed the house twice slowly. Then, under the shroud of dusk, a man knocked on the door. He was tall, wiry, with a pale, drawn face and unkempt beard. He wore a windbreaker and gloves despite the warm air, and his eyes, shielded by dark-tinted glasses, never blinked. "I'm looking for my dog," he said flatly. "Golden retriever. Male. I think someone took him." Hannah stood frozen, one hand behind the door frame. the other already dialing 911 behind her back. "I think you're mistaken." He smiled, a cold twitch of his lips. "I never am." The moment the police sirens howled from down the block, he vanished into the night like smoke. Later that evening, Lucas sat by Sonny's crate. The dog was awake now, more alert than before, eyes tracking every sound outside the window. "We found them," Lucas whispered. "But he knows." Sonny didn't wag his tail. Instead, he lifted his head, ears sharp. He was ready. The air hung thick with tension, the kind that made even the birds fall silent. A pale morning sun broke timidly through the gray veil above Willow Creek, casting long shadows over dew-soaked grass and rusted fence posts. Hannah gripped the steering wheel tightly as her car crept along the cracked asphalt leading into the hills beyond town. In the back seat, Lucas sat upright beside Sonny, the golden retriever resting his head on the boy's lap with a quiet seriousness that belied his injuries. The dog was healing, but there was a new awareness in his eyes, watchful, alert, like he remembered too much. Dr. Miranda Hayes, riding shotgun, kept glancing toward the side mirror, her lips pressed thin. She wore her practical olive coat, again boots caked with dirt from the night before. Tucked into her satchel were a camera, a small recorder, and a printed map of the old properties registered along Barrow Ridge. They weren't waiting for warrants. Not after last night. They were going to gather what evidence they could while there was still time. Lucas had insisted on coming. He knows the way, the boy had said, nodding to Sonny. And they'll listen to him. The car rolled to a stop just before a turnoff where the gravel path narrowed into a brush-covered trail. The ruins of an old barn could be seen in the distance, half swallowed by ivy and trees that had outgrown their fences. Sonny perked up, his body tensed, then he whined low in his throat. Lucas opened the door without hesitation, and Sonny leapt down, limping only slightly now, tail straight like an arrow pointing toward the trees. They followed the dog, single file, Lucas first, then Hannah, then Dr. Hayes. The woods were quiet except for the occasional snap of a twig beneath boots. Every so often, Sonny would pause, sniff the air, then veer slightly left or right, guiding them closer to something unseen. Eventually, they came upon a clearing. The ground was scorched in patches as if someone had tried to burn away evidence. Several large cages, long since abandoned, were collapsed in the dirt, some still bearing rusted chains. A shallow pit nearby was filled with animal bones and melted plastic bowls. It wasn't just a camp. It was a graveyard. Dr. Hayes took photos, her hands steady, her voice quiet as she recorded notes into her phone. Hannah, pale, pulled Lucas closer, shielding his eyes even though he didn't look away. Sonny sat at the edge of the pit, unmoving. His tail curled in his eyes, wide with memories that couldn't be translated into words. Suddenly, a distant engine rumbled. Tires crunched over gravel too close. "We need to go," Hannah whispered. They turned just as two black trucks pulled up near the tree line. 3 men stepped out, one holding what looked like a tranquilizer rifle. They wore khaki vests and hats with fake patches, Animal Control Division. But something in their posture screamed wrong. Too military, too alert. One of them, tall, with a narrow face and hollow cheeks, pointed toward them and said something into a radio clipped to his belt. Dr. Hayes didn't hesitate. She grabbed Lucas's hand. "Run!" They ducked low and bolted through the trees, Sonny limping but keeping pace, adrenaline pushing through his injured leg. The brush tore at their clothes and skin, but none of them slowed until they reached the car. Tires spun on loose dirt as Hannah reversed hard gravel, spitting into the air. Back home, shaken but safe for the moment, Hannah made sure all doors were locked. Lucas sat with Sonny in the kitchen, arms wrapped tightly around the dog's neck. "He remembers that man," he whispered. "He was there. He locked the others away. He wears the fake patch." Hannah knelt beside them, brushing Lucas's hair back from his forehead. "You were very brave today, but we have to be careful now." That evening, there was a knock at the door. A man in his early 40s stood on the porch wearing a crisp uniform that looked just convincing enough. He had neat blonde hair, rectangular glasses, and a wide, overly calm smile. A laminated ID badge was clipped to his jacket, though the text was just a blur beneath the plastic. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Clayton from the County Animal Control," he said smoothly. "We received a report that you're harboring an injured stray dog without registration." "May I come in?" Hannah narrowed her eyes. "May I see your paperwork?" Clayton's smile didn't waver. "It's standard protocol, ma'am. Nothing to worry about." From behind Hannah, Lucas's voice rang out like a bell. He's lying. That's him. Clayton's eyes flicked toward the boy. Lucas stepped forward, his voice unwavering. He locked Sonny up. He made the other dogs fight. He called Sonny useless because he wouldn't hurt the others. For the first time, the man's face faltered. The smile vanished. "I think I've come at a bad time," he said, backing away. "We'll follow up later," but Hannah already had her phone raised recording. "You're not coming back. If you do, I'll be ready." Clayton turned and left, quickly disappearing into a dark car parked 2 blocks down. That night they sat together on the living room floor, Hannah, Lucas, Dr. Hayes, and Sonny. The television remained off. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the gutters, brushing tree branches against the roof. But inside, it was quiet. They were not running anymore. They were planning. Tomorrow, Hayes said, "I'm contacting the state authorities. Grace already filed a report about the cabin. But this is bigger, organized. These people aren't going to stop unless someone forces them to." Lucas nodded, resting his head on Sonny's shoulder. "He's not afraid anymore," he said softly. Neither were they. The sky above Willow Creek had darkened to a bruised violet, hinting at the coming storm. Winds whispered warnings through the dying branches of sycamore trees, and a low hum seemed to settle over the earth like breath held in suspense. Inside the Miller home, however, the atmosphere pulsed with quiet urgency. Lucas sat cross-legged in the living room, his small hand resting gently on Sonny's back. The dog lay curled beside him, his body still healing but his eyes wide open, fixed on a space beyond the walls. Every few seconds he'd lift his head and let out a soft, almost inaudible whimper, not in pain, in recognition. "He hears them," Lucas whispered. "They're scared and they're far, but he hears them like a string tied to his chest. There's a little one with a torn ear. She cries when it rains." Across the room, Dr. Miranda Hayes leaned forward, scribbling notes in a worn leather journal. Her auburn hair was tied into a fraying ponytail, and the shadows under her eyes had darkened with each passing day. She didn't dismiss Lucas anymore, not after what they'd seen, not after Clayton's visit. "Describe the place again," she said gently. "Where do you think they are?" Lucas shook his head. "I don't think it. Sonny knows. It smells like metal and old fire. There's a red light near the door, and when it turns green, that's when they take one of the dogs out. The others get quiet when that happens." Dr. Hayes closed the notebook and stood rubbing her temples. "We need more than intuition," she murmured. A knock came at the door, not harsh, but measured. Hannah opened it to reveal Inspector Grace Donovan, dressed in a slate trench coat, clipboard tucked under one arm. In her early 50s, Grace had the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent decades fighting battles no one thanked her for. Her short salt and pepper hair framed a face lined with resolve. Once demoted for challenging a corruption ring involving law enforcement, she had returned with sharper instincts and fewer illusions. "I filed the preliminary request for a search warrant," she announced as she stepped inside. "But Judge Kellerman's dragging his feet. Too many holes, he says. No physical location, no named suspects besides a boy's testimony." Dr. Hayes looked up. "And the man who came to their house?" "No record of him at Animal Control." "That part's promising," Grace replied. "But it's not enough." Lucas looked up, frowning. "You don't believe Sonny?" Grace knelt beside him, her gaze softening. "I believe there's something happening, sweetheart. I just need something they'll believe, too." As tension lingered in the room, Clyde Miller entered from the back door. The elderly man had a quiet, almost ghost-like presence, with silver hair combed back, a lean frame wrapped in a navy sweater, and a cane he rarely needed but always carried. He rarely spoke unless it mattered. Tonight it did. "There's something about this boy," he said, slowly motioning to Lucas. "And that dog. My grandmother Ruth had the same look when she sat by the creek and foxes came to her like lambs. She used to say there was a rhythm to things. If you're still enough, you hear it. Lucas was born on her birthday." Grace raised a brow, intrigued. "You think this is inherited?" "I think it's something we forgot how to listen to." In the days that followed, a silent campaign began. While Grace continued her legal push, Hayes began interviewing locals whose dogs had gone missing over the past year. One name came up more than once: Briar's Hollow Farm, long abandoned but still owned on paper by a shell corporation. Its previous owner, a man named Morris Brenner, was known for training hunting dogs in the 90s. No one had seen him in years. One rainy afternoon, Grace and Dr. Hayes visited the county clerk's office and dug through land registry records. The signature on the Briar's Hollow deed matched a previous animal fighting case from another state, one that had mysteriously collapsed due to lack of evidence. Grace took a photo of the document. Her fingers shook as she did. Back home, Lucas grew quieter. The more Sonny heard, the more withdrawn the boy became, like a conduit. One night, Hannah found him standing in the hallway, his hand resting on the wall. "They're getting sick," he said softly. One of them stopped breathing. "The others don't cry anymore. It's worse than before." The next day, Clyde gave Lucas an old pendant silver shaped like a spiral leaf once belonging to Ruth. She said this helped her focus the noise. "You might try it." Lucas wore it that night. As Sonny lay beside him twitching in his sleep, Lucas whispered, "I see where they are now." He described a metal structure with floodlights, a buried hatch near the edge of a stone wall surrounded by thorn bushes. A small bell, rusted, hung above a hidden stairwell. "It's near a place with burned trees," he finished. "They call it the pit." Grace didn't wait. The next morning, she presented the recorded testimony, land ownership links, and photos to a new judge, one known for his disdain of animal cruelty cases. Judge Malik, a stern black man in his 60s with sharp glasses and a sharper moral compass, signed the emergency warrant before noon. "This is your one shot," he warned. "If you're wrong, they'll bury you." That evening, as the storm rolled in with thunder and low grumbles of approaching rain, Grace assembled a small task force of trustworthy deputies. They would head for Briar's Hollow at dawn. But Lucas didn't sleep. Neither did Sonny. The boy sat on the floor beside his friend, clutching the pendant and whispering, "Hold on. We're coming." The air at dawn was thick with anticipation and the lingering scent of rain. Willow Creek lay under a slate-gray sky, the kind that blanketed sound and seemed to listen more than it spoke. Dr. Hayes stood outside her truck, tying her hair back, her face sharper than usual, with the cold resolve of someone who knew that this day would be different. Beside her, Inspector Grace Donovan adjusted the grip on her flashlight and checked her holster with calm efficiency. She wore her badge clipped to her utility jacket, eyes scanning the tree line. Lucas stood between them, small and shivering, not from the chill, but from something unspoken. He held Sonny's leash gently. The golden retriever, though still limping from his injuries, held his head high. His coat was matted in patches, but glowed faintly in the morning light. There was something ancient in the way he stood alert, still aware. Behind them was a convoy of 3 unmarked SUVs filled with carefully vetted volunteers. They included Clint, a retired canine handler with a grizzled beard and a gentle voice, and Marisol, a soft-spoken vet tech in her 30s with wide, observant eyes. Each had brought trained rescue dogs with them, all of which had responded strangely when introduced to Sonny the night before, tail low, ears forward, as if they recognized something familiar. The plan was simple in its chaos. While a small group of volunteers and dogs circled the outer edge of Briar's Hollow to create distractions, howling, rustling, barking, the core team would approach from the west slope, where Lucas said the ground was softest. That was where the door lay. Lucas pointed through the thickets. "There. The bell is near the rock with moss. That's where they open the hatch." Clyde, who had insisted on joining despite Hannah's protest, placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Don't let go of Sonny," he whispered. "You keep your focus on the rhythm." The forest grew tighter as they moved forward, boots crunching damp undergrowth. The red house emerged through the fog like something from a half-remembered nightmare. Peeling paint-boarded windows and a crooked chimney gave it the appearance of having been forgotten on purpose. Grace gave a signal. The distraction team began its work. From across the field came sharp barks, followed by the echo of rustling brush. A light flicked on in the attic window. Someone was awake. Dr. Hayes and Lucas found the hatch first. Just as described, a metal plate with a circular handle lay beneath a decaying bell. The handle groaned as they turned it. Beneath the hatch, a stairway plunged into darkness, smelling of wet rust and sorrow. Sonny growled low. Grace descended first, flashlight slicing through the gloom. The tunnel below was narrow, barely 6 feet high and reinforced with iron beams. Old electric wiring dangled like skeletal fingers. At the far end, a door barred with a keypad blinked dim green. Lucas stepped forward. "It's this one," he said. "They're behind that wall." Grace turned to Clyde. "How the hell does he—" Clyde shook his head. "Don't ask questions you're not ready to believe the answers to." With a click, the keypad lit up. Lucas pressed 4 numbers without hesitation. The lock disengaged. "That's what she whispered," he said softly. "The little one with the torn ear." The door swung open to a chamber lined with cages. At least 15 dogs stared back at them, silent, motionless, some too weak to stand. The floor was covered in shredded newspaper and old bloodstains. Fluorescent lights flickered above like the last breath of something sick. Marisol rushed forward, kneeling by a trembling Labrador, her voice catching. "We need to carry the worst ones first. Some are in shock." But the moment cracked like glass when footsteps echoed behind them. From the tunnel came a shadow, tall, hunched, dragging a crowbar along the wall. The man who stepped into the light was in his 60s, with deep lines scored into his face and sunken blue eyes. His name, later confirmed, was Raymond Cobb, the former partner of Morris Brenner. He was not in the system because he had never been caught. He smiled at Lucas. Well, he rasped. "You're the one the dog won't shut up about." He lunged. Before Grace could draw her weapon, Cobb grabbed Lucas's jacket and yanked him backward. Lucas screamed, but it was Sonny who moved first. The golden retriever launched himself forward with a snarl that sounded nothing like the soft animal Lucas had nursed back to health. His body collided with Cobb's leg, knocking the man off balance. Sonny's injured paw gave way, but he didn't stop. He clamped down on Cobb's arm, teeth bared, holding with every ounce of his failing strength. Grace rushed in, slamming the crowbar from Cobb's hand, cuffing him as he screamed. "You're done," she hissed. "You're not getting another night with anything that breathes." Lucas dropped to the ground beside Sonny, cradling the dog's head. "Stay with me," he pleaded, voice shaking. "You're safe now. You're safe." Up above, volunteers guided the dogs to waiting vans. Every animal was accounted for. Some had microchips long removed but still traceable. Others would require months of rehabilitation. But they were alive. As the last crate was loaded, Grace turned to Dr. Hayes. "We'll need statements, and evidence logs, and probably lawyers." Dr. Hayes nodded. "And a quiet place for the boy and his dog to sleep." Back at home, Hannah held her son tightly while Clyde stood by the window watching the rain. In the living room, Sonny lay on a blanket, his bandaged paw resting on Lucas's lap. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Something had ended. And something else, quieter but filled with light, had just begun. The sun rose gently over Willow Creek, casting a golden hue across the town that had once shivered under a cloud of silence. Dew clung to the fields like memories not ready to leave, and the air held a kind of stillness that came only after storms, the stillness of change. The red house stood vacant now, police tape fluttering in the morning breeze. The basement was cordoned off the cages, removed the evidence tagged and logged. That day, the arrests had come swiftly. Grace Donovan had coordinated with the state task force, and by nightfall, not only was Raymond Cobb behind bars, but 3 other key players had been named and taken in, including a deputy mayor with a clean smile and a dirty ledger. It had shocked the town, but the townspeople were tired of pretending not to see. On the courthouse steps days later, Lucas sat beside Sonny now with a fresh bandage on his foreleg and a new blue collar bearing his name in gold stitching. They were flanked by Dr. Hayes, Grace, and Clyde, each worn but proud. Camera crews buzzed around them, reporters asking questions Lucas didn't understand and Sonny didn't care for. But one woman knelt to his level. She was tall, mid-40s African-American, with natural curls and a calm aura. Her name was Elena Brooks, a national journalist with a reputation for giving voices to those who had none. Her clothes were simple, a beige trench coat, leather notebook in hand, and her tone never patronized. "Lucas," she asked gently, "how did you know where the dogs were?" Lucas looked to Sonny. The dog blinked slowly. "They told me," he said simply. "They were whispering under the trees." The clip went viral. Within 48 hours, the story was everywhere. Boy and injured dog expose underground cruelty ring. Donations poured in from across the country. Animal lovers, parents, even veterans wrote letters. A retired architect offered to design a rehabilitation center for free. Hannah, who had quietly stood behind everything, declined interviews but helped file paperwork for the newly chartered Sunny Haven, a rescue and recovery center for abused and abandoned dogs. Set on an open parcel of land donated by an anonymous benefactor on the town's edge, the center would include walking paths, playfields, and a therapy garden. At the heart of it, a single tall sycamore tree. On the day of the groundbreaking, Lucas wore a soft blue shirt and held Sonny's leash like he was holding something ancient and fragile. The mayor gave a short speech, and Clyde, now semi-famous for his role, shook the man's hand with a skeptical nod. He'd never trusted politicians. But this one had tears in his eyes when the children from the local school released painted stones in honor of the 15 rescued dogs, each with a name, each with a new life ahead. Sunny's name sat in bold letters on the archway above the gate, Sunny Haven, where healing has a voice. Meanwhile, Dr. Hayes continued working at her clinic, but now split her time between surgeries and supervising the center. She had taken in one of the older rescued dogs, a blind hound named Maxie. Though slow-moving, Maxie always seemed to find her way to Sunny's side, as if tethered to the energy that had saved her. Grace, now promoted and recognized for her role in dismantling the network, began training young officers in compassion-based rescue operations. She started visiting local schools, telling children the story of the boy who listened. The story, of course, changed a little in each telling. Some said Lucas could actually talk to animals. Others whispered about Sunny having been something more than a dog. But to Lucas, they were all missing the point. He never claimed to understand every word. It wasn't about language. It was about listening to what pain sounds like when no one believes it's real. One afternoon, as autumn settled into the bones of Willow Creek, Lucas returned to the sycamore behind his house. Leaves were beginning to fall. Sunny, a little older now, but just as watchful, lay beside him in the grass. "Do you still hear them?" Clyde asked from the porch. Lucas nodded, tracing the bark of the tree with one small finger. "They don't shout anymore," he said, "but they still whisper. About places. About people like me." Clyde's face softened. "You think you'll always hear them?" Lucas turned sunlight, catching in his eyes like reflections off water. "Maybe not forever," he said, "but long enough to make sure someone else learns how." Sunny rested his head on Lucas's knee. The wind blew soft and warm through the sycamore leaves, and for a moment, if you were quiet enough, you might have heard it too, not a voice exactly, but a presence. A hush filled with stories waiting to be found, hurt, waiting to be healed, hope tucked between roots and sky. Sometimes the quietest voices are the ones we need to hear most, whether it's a wounded dog, a lonely child, or simply someone sitting beside us in silence. This story reminds us to listen with our hearts, not just our ears, in our busy lives. It's easy to overlook small signs of pain or kindness, but maybe the world would be a better place if we all paused long enough to notice if this story touched you even a little. Please like the video, share it with someone who needs warmth today, and subscribe to Tales of Warmth for more stories that heal and inspire. And before you go, tell us in the comments, have you ever heard something others couldn't? A whisper, a feeling, a moment that stayed with you? We'd love to know.